They say gratitude brings families together, but I learned that silence can tear them apart faster than any argument ever could. That Thanksgiving night, as I stood up with my champagne glass trembling in my hand, watching my family's faces turn from confusion to shock, I realized that sometimes the most devastating truths are the ones we've been too polite to speak. My name is Dorothy Williams, and at 67 years old, I discovered that being invisible in your own family isn't just painful. It's a choice they make for you, one calculated omission at a time. The dining room was perfect that evening, or at least it looked that way from the doorway where I stood, catching my breath before entering. The mahogany table my late husband James had bought for our 10th anniversary gleamed under the chandelier's warm light, reflecting the faces of 23 family members who had gathered for what they thought would be another traditional Thanksgiving. The smell of sage and butter from the turkey I'd been basting since dawn mixed with the cinnamon from the apple pies cooling on the kitchen counter, creating that familiar holiday aroma that usually made my heart swell with pride. But this year, as I smoothed down my navy dress, the one James always said made my eyes sparkle, my hands wouldn't stop shaking. I could hear my grandson Marcus laughing at something his girlfriend had said, that deep, genuine laugh that reminded me so much of James when we were young. My daughter Patricia's voice carried over the chatter, directing everyone to their seats with the efficiency of a general, while her husband Tom uncorked bottles of wine with practiced ease. Everything seemed so normal, so perfectly orchestrated, that for a moment I almost convinced myself I was imagining the weight of the manila envelope hidden in my bedroom drawer upstairs. I had discovered it 3 weeks earlier, purely by accident, when I was looking for Patricia's birth certificate to help her with some paperwork she'd asked me to handle. The envelope was tucked behind old photo albums in the guest room closet, the room Patricia and Tom used whenever they stayed overnight to help me with the house, as they put it. My fingers had frozen when I saw the documents inside, property assessments, legal forms with my forged signature, and a detailed timeline of how they planned to have me declared incompetent after the holidays. The word incompetent had blurred through my tears as I read their strategy, complete with cherry-picked examples of my declining mental state, forgetting where I'd put my reading glasses, asking Marcus twice about his college plans, crying on the anniversary of James's death. Normal things, human things, twisted into evidence of senility. But what had shattered something deep inside me wasn't just the betrayal itself. It was the casual cruelty in the margins. Tom's handwriting, noting that they should act extra caring through the holidays to avoid suspicion, and Patricia's reminder to get the Thanksgiving photos for documentation of our support. Standing there in the doorway now, I watched them all settling into their chairs, and I couldn't help but notice how they'd arranged themselves. Patricia sat at the head of the table, James's old spot, with Tom at the other end, as if they were already the hosts in what was still my home. My chair, the one I'd occupied for 37 years of family dinners, had been moved to the side, squeezed between my sister-in-law Helen, who spent most dinners on her phone, and cousin Jerome's teenage daughter, who I knew would leave early for a party. Even in the seating arrangement, I had become an afterthought, a placeholder between people who barely noticed I was there. The irony wasn't lost on me that I had spent 14 hours preparing this feast, my knees aching as I peeled potatoes, my back protesting as I lifted the turkey, my fingers cramping as I crimped pie crusts, all while they were planning to take everything James and I had built together. "Mom, there you are," Patricia called out, her voice syrupy sweet, in that way I now recognized as performance. "We were just about to start without you." She laughed, and others joined in, but I heard the edge underneath it, the impatience that I was delaying her schedule. I made my way to my designated chair, feeling every one of my 67 years in my joints, but keeping my spine straight and my expression pleasant. Tom stood up, raising his wine glass with that politician's smile he'd perfected over the years of climbing the corporate ladder. "Before we eat," he announced, his voice commanding attention, "I think we should go around the table and share what we're grateful for this year." The tradition we'd started when Patricia was 5, when James was still alive, when this house rang with genuine love instead of calculated greed. My granddaughter Keisha went first, thanking her parents for paying for her study abroad program. Marcus thanked his Uncle Tom for the internship connection. One by one, they went around the table, and I started noticing a pattern that made my stomach twist into knots. Patricia thanked Tom for being such a wonderful provider and partner. Tom thanked Patricia for her unwavering support and vision for their future. Helen thanked Patricia for helping her with her investment portfolio. Jerome thanked Tom for the business advice that had saved his company. My nephew David thanked Patricia and Tom for hosting such a beautiful dinner in my house with food I had cooked at the table my husband had bought. Each expression of gratitude was a thread in a web that connected everyone to Patricia and Tom, positioning them as the benevolent center of the family universe while I sat there, invisible, unmentioned, forgotten. The pattern continued, relentless in its exclusion. Marcus's girlfriend thanked Patricia for welcoming her into the family. Cousin Sarah thanked Tom for fixing her car last month. Even my own sister-in-law, Helen, who I had nursed through her divorce, who had lived in my guest room for 6 months when she had nowhere else to go, thanked Patricia for always being there for her. The words felt like small cuts, each one deliberate, each one designed to rewrite the family history with me edited out of it. I kept my hands folded in my lap, feeling my wedding ring, the one James had placed on my finger 42 years ago, pressing against my skin, reminding me of who I really was beneath this orchestrated erasure. When the gratitude circle finally came to Patricia, she stood up, her glass raised high, her voice thick with what sounded like emotion, but what I now knew was calculated manipulation. "I'm grateful for this beautiful family," she said, her eyes scanning the table, but somehow never landing on me. "For my amazing husband who makes everything possible, for our wonderful children who make us so proud, for all of you who support us in our journey to build something lasting for the next generation." She paused, dabbing at her eyes with her napkin, a gesture I'd seen her practice in the mirror when she was 16 and trying out for the school play. "And most of all, I'm grateful that we have each other, that we can come together in this beautiful home and create memories that will last forever." She sat down to applause, actual applause, as if she hadn't just given a speech about gratitude that managed to thank everyone except the woman who had given birth to her, raised her, supported her through every failure and success, and was now cooking Thanksgiving dinner while she plotted to steal my home. The silence that followed felt expectant, as if they were waiting for something. It took me a moment to realize they were waiting for me to speak, to share my own gratitude, probably expecting me to thank them for gracing me with their presence, for allowing me to cook and clean and serve them in what they already considered their future property. I looked around the table at these faces I had loved, had photographed and framed on every wall of this house, had prayed for every night for decades. My throat felt tight, but not with tears, with rage, the kind of quiet, determined rage that comes when you finally see clearly after being blind for too long. If you've ever felt invisible in your own life, in your own family, you'll understand what happened next. Leave me a comment if this resonates with you, because what I'm about to tell you changed everything. I stood up slowly, my knees protesting, but my resolve steel strong. "I'd like to share what I'm grateful for," I said, my voice steady and clear, cutting through the comfortable chatter that had resumed. The room fell silent, and for the first time all evening, every eye was on me. I picked up my champagne glass, the one Patricia had filled with cheap Prosecco while everyone else got the good champagne. Another small cruelty I might have overlooked before. "I'm grateful for clarity," I began, watching confusion flicker across Patricia's face. "I'm grateful for the ability to see people for who they really are, not who they pretend to be. I'm grateful for accidentally finding certain documents that open my eyes to the truth about what family really means to some people." Patricia's face had gone pale, her hand reaching for Tom's under the table. "I'm grateful," I continued, my voice growing stronger, "for the lawyer I hired 3 weeks ago, who helped me understand that attempted elder fraud is a serious crime." The room erupted in gasps and confused murmurs, but I raised my hand, and surprisingly, they all fell silent again. Perhaps it was the tone of my voice, or maybe the expression on my face, but for the first time in years, I commanded the complete attention of my family. "I'm grateful," I said, looking directly at Patricia, whose face had gone from pale to ashen, "for the security cameras I had installed last month, which recorded some very interesting conversations between my daughter and son-in-law about their plans to have me declared incompetent after the holidays." Tom's wine glass slipped from his hand, shattering against his plate, red wine spreading across my grandmother's white tablecloth like blood. "But mostly," I said, raising my glass higher. I'm grateful that I still have my wits about me, despite what some of you might have been led to believe. Grateful that I can still recognize a snake in my own home, even when it shares my DNA. Marcus stood up, his face shocked. Grandma, what are you talking about? His genuine confusion told me he wasn't part of it, and I felt a small relief in that. Ask your mother, I said, my eyes never leaving Patricia's face. Ask her about the papers in the guest room closet. Ask her about the meetings with the estate lawyer she thought I didn't know about. Ask her about the psychological evaluation she scheduled for me in January, with a doctor who's been paid to find me incompetent. The room was so silent I could hear the turkey crackling in the kitchen, could hear Helen's rapid breathing, could hear my own heartbeat steady and strong. Patricia finally found her voice, high and defensive. Mom, you're confused. This is exactly what we were worried about. These paranoid delusions. Delusions? I laughed, and it wasn't a pleasant sound. Like the delusion that my signature was on documents I never signed? Like the delusion that you've been telling family members I've been showing signs of dementia? Like the delusion that you and Tom have been slowly turning everyone against me, positioning yourselves as my caretakers while you count down the days until you can lock me away and take everything? I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone, where I had photographed every single document. Would you like me to share these delusions with everyone here? Or should we wait for my lawyer to do it in court? The silence stretched on, heavy and suffocating, until Patricia suddenly burst into tears. Real ones this time, I could tell by the way her shoulders shook. But I felt no sympathy, only a cold clarity that had been building for weeks. How could you? Patricia sobbed, but I wasn't sure if she was asking how I could expose her or how I could stand in the way of her plans. Tom tried to salvage the situation, his corporate training kicking in. Dorothy, I think there's been a misunderstanding. We're only concerned about your well-being. This reaction, this paranoia, it's exactly why we were worried. But I cut him off with a look that could have frozen hell itself. The only thing you're concerned about is the deed to this house and my retirement accounts. Don't insult what's left of my intelligence by pretending otherwise. I turned to address the rest of the table. These people who had been manipulated into seeing me as a burden rather than the matriarch who had held this family together for decades. For those of you who didn't know about this scheme, I don't blame you. Patricia and Tom are very good at manipulation, at twisting reality to serve their purposes. But ask yourselves this, when was the last time any of you thanked me for anything? When was the last time you saw me as anything more than an old woman in the way of their inheritance? The question hung in the air like an accusation, and I saw the shame creeping into some of their faces as they realized how they'd been played. Helen put down her phone for the first time all evening, her eyes wide with dawning comprehension. Jerome's wife, Sandra, who had been silent until now, suddenly spoke up. The investment opportunity, she said slowly, looking at Patricia. You said you'd have access to capital after the new year. This was what you meant? Patricia's tears had stopped, replaced by a hard, calculating look I recognized from when she was a teenager, caught in a lie, but trying to figure out how to turn it to her advantage. You don't understand the full situation, she said, her voice taking on a professional tone, as if she were in a business meeting. Mom has been struggling. The forgotten appointments, the confusion, the crying jags. We were trying to protect her. Protect me? I laughed again, bitter and sharp. By stealing from me? By turning my own family against me? By planning to lock me away in some facility while you live in my house and spend my money? I looked around the table at all of them, these people I had loved and trusted. Every forgotten appointment was because you gave me the wrong time. Every moment of confusion was when you deliberately contradicted things you'd told me earlier. Every tear I shed was from grief. Grief for my husband, grief for the family I thought I had, grief for the daughter I raised who became someone I don't recognize. I set down my champagne glass, untouched, and pulled out the chair I'd been assigned to, that insulting seat on the margins of my own family gathering. But I didn't sit. Instead, I pushed it under the table with finality. This toast, I said, my voice carrying the weight of every year I'd given to this family, is the last thing you'll ever hear from me in this house. My lawyer will be in touch about the attempted fraud charges, and Patricia, Tom, you have 30 minutes to leave my property before I call the police. The rest of you can decide for yourselves whether you want to stay for dessert. But know this, the woman who cooked this meal, who opened her home to you, who loved you despite your indifference, she sees you all clearly now. And what I see makes me grateful for only one thing, that James isn't here to witness what his family has become. The room remained frozen as I walked toward the doorway, my footsteps echoing on the hardwood floors James had installed himself, floors that would remain mine until I decided otherwise. But as I reached the threshold, Patricia's voice, desperate and angry, called out behind me. "You can't do this! We're your family! You owe us!" And that's when I turned around one last time, my eyes meeting hers with a clarity that comes only from finally seeing the truth. "I owe you nothing," I said quietly. "I gave you life, love, education, support, and countless second chances. What you chose to do with those gifts is on you. But this house, this money, this life I built with your father, none of it belongs to you. And after tonight, neither do I." I walked up the stairs to my bedroom, each step feeling lighter than the last, even as I heard the chaos erupting below. Voices raised in accusation, chairs scraping against floors, doors slamming. None of it mattered anymore. In my bedroom, I sat on the edge of the bed James and I had shared for 37 years, my hands finally steady as I pulled out my phone to check the recording app. Everything from dinner had been captured. Every dismissive comment, every calculated omission, every moment of their shock when I revealed the truth. The small camera I'd hidden in the centerpiece, a purchase that the old Dorothy would have never imagined making, had done its job perfectly. I could hear them still arguing downstairs, Patricia's shrill voice trying to regain control, Tom's deeper tones attempting damage control, and Marcus's confused questions cutting through it all. The boy deserved to know the truth about his parents, even if it would shatter his image of them. I opened the drawer of my nightstand and pulled out the folder my lawyer, Mr. Grayson, had prepared for me, a complete timeline of Patricia and Tom's deception, backed by evidence that would hold up in any court. The irony was that if they had just asked for help, if they had come to me honestly about whatever financial troubles they were facing, I would have given them anything. But they chose deception, and worse, they chose to erase me from my own life story. A knock on my bedroom door interrupted my thoughts. "Grandma?" Marcus's voice was soft, uncertain. "Can I come in?" I hesitated for a moment, then called out, "It's open." He entered slowly, his tall frame seeming to fold in on itself with confusion and shame. In his hands, he held the manila envelope from the guest room. Patricia must have sent him to retrieve it, not knowing he would actually read it. His face was ashen, his eyes red-rimmed, and when he looked at me, I saw James in him so clearly it made my chest ache. "Is all of this true?" he asked, holding up the papers like they might burn him. Did my parents really plan to?" He couldn't finish the sentence, couldn't voice the ugly truth about the people who raised him. I patted the bed beside me, and he sat down, his shoulders shaking. "I'm afraid so, baby," I said, using the endearment I'd called him since he was small. "Your parents have been planning this for at least 6 months, maybe longer." Marcus flipped through the pages, his expression growing more horrified with each document he read. "This evaluation report," he said, his voice cracking. "They described you as showing clear signs of cognitive decline and mentioned specific incidents. But Grandma, I was there for some of these. You weren't confused at all. They're lying about everything." He looked at me with eyes that begged for this to be a misunderstanding, for his parents to not be the people these documents revealed them to be. "The day they said you forgot my graduation date and showed up at the wrong venue? Mom told you the wrong location on purpose. I heard her on the phone laughing about it with Aunt Helen, saying it would be good documentation." The betrayal in his voice matched what I had felt 3 weeks ago, that crushing realization that the people you trust most are capable of casual cruelty. "How long have you known?" he asked, and I could see him trying to piece together the timeline, probably wondering how I had managed to act normal around them while knowing their plans. 3 weeks, I said, running my fingers through his hair like I used to when he was little, and would come to me with scraped knees or hurt feelings. The longest 3 weeks of my life, pretending everything was fine while I met with lawyers and installed cameras and moved my important documents to a safety deposit box they don't know about. I pulled out my phone and showed him the security footage from last week, Patricia and Tom in my living room while they thought I was napping, going through my mail, photographing my bank statements. Tom commenting that the house would sell for at least $800,000 in this market. Marcus watched in horror as his mother practiced her concerned daughter act, rehearsing what she would say to the doctor they had chosen, how she would cry about how much it hurt to see her mother declining. "But you're not declining," Marcus said firmly, looking at me with a clarity that gave me hope. "You're sharper than most people my age. You remember everything, you manage your finances, you cooked that entire dinner by yourself. They're trying to gaslight you." I smiled sadly at him. This young man who could see the truth even when it meant accepting his parents were monsters. "They almost succeeded," I admitted. "There were moments when I started to doubt myself, when their constant contradictions and moved appointments and hidden items made me wonder if maybe I was losing it. That's the cruelest part of what they did. They tried to make me complicit in my own destruction." A crash from downstairs interrupted us, followed by Tom's voice raised in anger. Marcus flinched, and I saw the war playing out on his face. Loyalty to his parents versus loyalty to the truth. "What are you going to do?" he asked, and I heard the fear in his voice, the recognition that his family was about to implode completely. "I've already done it," I said, standing up and walking to my dresser where I had placed the new documents Mr. Grayson had drawn up. "Your parents have been removed from my will entirely. The house will go to you and Keisha when I die, in a trust that your parents can't touch. My retirement accounts have been restructured with new beneficiaries, charities mostly, and some for you and your sister's education funds, also protected from your parents' reach." I handed him a copy of the new will, watched his eyes widen at the numbers. James had been a successful man, careful with investments, and I had continued his prudent financial management. We were worth far more than Patricia and Tom knew, accounts they hadn't discovered in their snooping, investments they couldn't access, even if they had succeeded in their plan. Marcus set down the papers, his hands shaking. "They destroyed our family for money," he said, the words heavy with disbelief. "All those Sunday dinners, all those holidays, all those times Mom said she was worried about you, it was all about money?" I sat back beside him, taking his hand in mine. "Not all of it," I said gently. "Your mother wasn't always like this. When she was young, she was loving and genuine. But somewhere along the way, maybe when she married Tom, maybe when the economy got tough and they overextended themselves, she changed. Or maybe she just revealed who she always was underneath. I'll never really know." The sound of car doors slamming outside made us both look toward the window. I could see Patricia and Tom loading things into their Mercedes, their movements sharp and angry. Other family members were leaving too, the exodus happening faster than the 30 minutes I had given them. "Grandma," Marcus said suddenly, urgently, "the things they said about you crying on Dad's death anniversary, Grandpa James's anniversary, they used that as evidence of instability." His voice broke with indignation. "How is grieving someone you loved for 40 years a sign of mental decline? How could they be so cruel?" I squeezed his hand, feeling the weight of every anniversary I'd faced alone, while Patricia complained about having to visit on those days. "Because they needed it to be," I said simply. "When someone wants something badly enough, they can justify any cruelty, rationalize any betrayal. Your mother convinced herself that she deserved my money more than I deserved my freedom. That's a special kind of evil, the kind that comes dressed in concern and family obligation." Through the window, I watched Patricia stop and look back at the house, her face a mask of fury. Even from this distance, I could see her mouth moving, probably promising Tom that they would fight this, that they would find a way to get what they thought they deserved. If you're still reading this, you probably understand the kind of pain that comes from family betrayal. Share your own story in the comments if you need to be heard, because I understand that need now more than ever. The house grew quieter as more cars pulled away, and I found myself wondering who would stay, who would choose truth over the comfortable lies Patricia had been feeding them. "I should go back down," Marcus said, but he didn't move. "Keisha's probably confused and scared." I nodded, understanding his conflict. "Your sister is downstairs?" I asked, and he confirmed she was, probably in tears, probably being fed Patricia's version of events. "Bring her up here," I said. "She deserves to know the truth from someone who won't lie to her." Marcus stood to leave, then paused at the door. "Grandma, I'm sorry," he said, his voice thick, "for not seeing it sooner, For all the times I didn't thank you, for letting them make you invisible. I felt tears prick my eyes for the first time that evening, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of relief that at least one person saw me, really saw me. After Marcus left, I walked to my window and looked out at the backyard where so many family gatherings had taken place. The swing set James had built for Patricia when she was 5 still stood in the corner, weathered but sturdy, like everything he had made. I remembered pushing her on that swing, her laughter carrying across the yard, her little voice shouting, "Higher, Mama, higher!" When had that joyful little girl become the woman who would destroy her mother for money? The answer came to me as I stood there. It happened gradually, then suddenly, like bankruptcy of the soul. Each small compromise, each little lie, each rationalization had built up until Patricia could sit at my table, eating my food, planning my imprisonment without a flicker of conscience. The sound of footsteps on the stairs drew my attention, and I turned to find not Marcus and Keisha, but Helen, my sister-in-law, standing in my doorway with tears streaming down her face. "Dorothy," she said, her voice breaking, "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." She stood there, seemingly afraid to enter without permission. This woman who had lived in my home for 6 months, who had cried on my shoulder through her divorce, who had just hours ago thanked Patricia for being there for her while ignoring my existence. "Come in, Helen," I said, too tired to be angry at everyone, needing to save my rage for those who truly deserved it. She entered slowly, her phone clutched in her hand, and I noticed she had been recording something. "I stayed after everyone left," she said. "Patricia and Tom, they didn't know I was in the bathroom. I heard them talking, planning what to do next. Dorothy, they're not going to stop. They're planning to contest any legal action, to claim you're paranoid, that you manipulated Marcus, that tonight was proof of your declining mental state." She held up her phone. "But I recorded everything, every word, including Tom saying they need to accelerate the timeline and Patricia saying she knows a doctor who will say whatever they need for the right price." I took the phone from Helen, listening to the recording, hearing my daughter's voice plan my destruction with the same tone she used to plan grocery lists. "Why?" I asked Helen, not about Patricia's actions, but about her sudden allegiance to truth. Helen sat down heavily in my reading chair, looking older than her 63 years. "Because I realized tonight that I've been a fool," she said. "Patricia had me convinced that you were becoming difficult, that you were showing signs of dementia. Every story she told made you sound more unstable, more in need of intervention. But tonight, when you stood up and spoke with such clarity, such power, I realized I'd been listening to lies. And I remembered all the times you were there for me when Patricia was too busy, all the moments you held this family together while we gave the credit to others." She paused, wiping her eyes. "I'm ashamed of myself, Dorothy. You deserved better from all of us." Before I could respond, Marcus returned with Keisha, whose face was swollen from crying. My granddaughter, 22 years old and usually so confident, looked lost and young. "Grandma," she said, rushing into my arms like she hadn't done since she was 12. "Mom's saying horrible things about you. She's calling people, telling them you've lost your mind, that you attacked her at dinner, that we need to have you hospitalized." I held her tight, feeling her shake with sobs. This girl who had been manipulated by her parents but hadn't been part of their plan. "Let her make her calls," I said, stroking Keisha's hair. "I have evidence, witnesses, and most importantly, I have the truth. Your mother can spin all the stories she wants, but fraud is fraud, and attempted elder abuse is a crime that prosecutors take very seriously these days." Marcus showed his sister the documents, and Helen played the recording she had just made. With each piece of evidence, I watched Keisha's worldview shatter and rebuild, the innocence in her eyes replaced by a harder wisdom. "There's something else," Marcus said, pulling out his own phone. "I've been doing some research while everyone was leaving. Mom and Tom are in serious debt. They took out a second mortgage on their house. They have massive credit card debt, and Tom's been hiding losses from failed investments. They're about 3 months from bankruptcy." The pieces clicked into place. The desperation behind their plan, the timeline they had chosen, the reason they had moved so aggressively to position themselves as my caretakers. "They were going to use my money to save themselves," I said, understanding flooding through me. This was never about concern for my well-being. It was about their financial desperation. Helen nodded, adding, "That investment opportunity Patricia mentioned to Jerome and Sandra?" She was planning to use your money for that too. She had the whole thing planned out. Take control of your assets, pay off their debts, invest in this scheme Tom found, and live off the profits while keeping you in the cheapest facility they could find. The cruelty of it all hit me anew. But this time, instead of pain, I felt a cold fury building. They hadn't just planned to steal from me. They had planned to warehouse me like an unwanted piece of furniture while they lived in my home and spent my money. "Grandma," Keisha said, her voice small, "what's going to happen to them? To us?" I looked at my 2 grandchildren, these young people who didn't deserve to pay for their parents' crimes, but would inevitably be affected by them. "Your parents will face the consequences of their actions," I said carefully. "As for you 2, you're adults now. You can choose what kind of people you want to be, whether you want to follow their example or chart a different path. I'll support you either way, but I won't enable anyone's deception or cruelty, not even for blood." A sudden pounding on the front door interrupted our conversation. Tom's voice boomed through the house. "Dorothy, open this door! We're not done talking!" I could hear Patricia too, her voice shrill, demanding to be let in, claiming they had rights, that this was still their family home. Marcus started to stand, but I put my hand on his shoulder. "No," I said. "Let them rage. I've already called the police to report trespassers. They were given 30 minutes to leave and that time has passed." As if on cue, sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. Through the window, I could see Tom's face go from angry red to pale white as he realized I wasn't bluffing. Patricia was still screaming about her rights, about family, about how I couldn't do this to them, but her voice was becoming more desperate, more unhinged. Helen stood up and looked out the window. "Jerome and Sandra are still here," she said, surprised. "They're in their car, but they haven't left. They're just watching." I wasn't surprised. Jerome had always been one to watch drama unfold, to gather information he could use later. But Sandra had looked genuinely shocked at dinner, genuinely appalled when she realized what Patricia had been planning. "Let them watch," I said. "Let everyone see what Patricia and Tom really are when they don't get their way." The police cars pulled into my driveway, their lights painting the walls of my bedroom in alternating red and blue. I stood up, smoothing down my dress, preparing to face whatever came next. But as I moved toward the door, Keisha grabbed my hand. "Grandma," she said, tears still streaming down her face. "I heard them talking last week about putting you in Riverside Manor. I didn't understand then, but now, Grandma, that's the place that was in the news for neglect violations. They were going to put you in a place where people die from lack of care." The rage that had been simmering all evening finally boiled over. My own daughter hadn't just planned to steal from me. She had planned to essentially kill me through neglect, to put me in a facility known for its violations while she lived in luxury. "Marcus, Keisha, Helen," I said, my voice steady despite the fury burning in my chest. "You're about to witness something important. You're about to see that standing up to family members who hurt you isn't betrayal. It's self-preservation. And sometimes it's justice." I walked down the stairs with purpose, each step deliberate and firm. Through the glass panels beside the front door, I could see 2 police officers talking to Patricia and Tom. Patricia was gesturing wildly, her face contorted with rage, while Tom tried his businessman approach, all false calm and reasonableness. I opened the door, and all eyes turned to me. "Officers," I said, my voice clear and strong. "These are the trespassers I called about. They were given 30 minutes to leave my property and have refused to do so. Additionally, I'll be filing charges for attempted elder fraud and abuse. I have documentation and witnesses." Patricia lunged toward me, but one of the officers stepped between us. "You evil witch!" she screamed. "You're my mother. You can't do this to me. I gave you grandchildren. I took care of you." The lies fell from her lips so easily, even now, even when everyone could see the truth. "You took care of me?" I asked, my voice cutting through her hysteria. "When, Patricia? When you were planning to have me declared incompetent? When you were forging my signature? When you were telling family members I was losing my mind? Or when you were researching the cheapest, most neglectful facility you could find to dump me in?" The officers were taking notes now, their expressions serious. Tom tried to interject, claiming I was confused, that this was all a misunderstanding, but I pulled out my phone and showed them just a sample of the evidence. The forged documents, the recorded conversations, the evaluation appointment made without my knowledge or consent. "Ma'am," the older officer said to me, his voice respectful, "do you want to press charges tonight, or would you prefer to handle this through your attorney?" "My attorney will handle the formal charges," I said, "but I want them removed from my property immediately. They are no longer welcome here, ever." Patricia let out a wail that echoed through the neighborhood. "You're destroying our family," she cried. "You're taking away our future." And in that moment, her mask finally slipped completely. Not, "You're hurting me, your daughter," or "You're breaking my heart, Mom." No, I was taking away their future, the future they had planned using my money, my home, my life as their stepping stone. The officers escorted them to their car, Patricia still screaming about lawsuits and elder abuse and how she would have me committed. Tom remained silent now, perhaps finally realizing that his corporate smooth-talking wouldn't work here, that they had been caught, exposed, and defeated. As their car pulled away, followed by the police to ensure they actually left, I stood in my doorway and looked at the small audience that remained. Marcus and Keisha stood behind me, Helen beside them. Jerome and Sandra had gotten out of their car and were approaching slowly, cautiously. In the distance, I could see neighbors peering through curtains and standing on porches, drawn by the commotion. This was far from the quiet, dignified Thanksgiving I had planned, but perhaps it was the one that needed to happen. Sometimes the truth needs witnesses, needs to be dragged into the light where everyone can see it, ugly and raw and undeniable. "Aunt Dorothy," Jerome said, speaking for the first time all evening. "We had no idea. Patricia had us all convinced that you needed help." Sandra nodded, her face stricken. "She showed us examples, had stories. We thought we were supporting what was best for you." I looked at them. These family members who had been so easily convinced that I was losing my mind, who had been ready to stand by while Patricia stole everything from me. "The only thing I needed help with," I said, exhaustion finally creeping into my voice, "was seeing my daughter for who she really was. And now I do. Now we all do." But even as I stood there, surrounded by the wreckage of what had been my family, I knew this wasn't over. Patricia and Tom wouldn't give up easily. They had too much to lose, were too desperate, too convinced of their own entitlement. The real battle was just beginning, and I could feel it in the air like a storm approaching. Looking at Marcus and Keisha's faces, I saw fear mixing with their shock. They knew their parents better than anyone, knew what they were capable of when cornered. "Come inside," I said to everyone still standing in my yard. "There's still pie, and we have a lot to talk about." Because if Patricia thought she had seen me fight tonight, she had no idea what was coming. The woman she had tried to erase, to diminish, to destroy, that woman was done being invisible, and she was just getting started. The house felt different with just the 5 of us sitting around the kitchen table, eating pie in silence while the abandoned Thanksgiving dinner grew cold in the dining room. Marcus and Keisha sat close together, siblings united in their shock, while Helen picked at her apple pie with trembling fingers. Jerome and Sandra had chosen to stay, their faces grave as they processed everything they had witnessed. I poured coffee with steady hands, though inside I felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, knowing Patricia would try to push me off, but not knowing from which direction the shove would come. "She won't stop," Keisha said suddenly, her voice hollow. "You don't know Mom like we do, Grandma. When she doesn't get what she wants, she becomes—" She trailed off, unable to find words for what her mother became. "Vindictive," Marcus finished for her. "Destructive. Remember when she didn't get that promotion 5 years ago? She spent months plotting against her colleague, spreading rumors until the woman quit. They were telling me things about my daughter I didn't know, painting a picture of someone who had hidden her true nature even from me, her mother." My phone buzzed on the table, and I saw it was Mr. Grayson, my lawyer. "Excuse me," I said, stepping into the hallway to take the call. His voice was urgent, professional but concerned. "Dorothy, I just received a call from Adult Protective Services. Someone has filed an emergency complaint claiming you're in immediate danger to yourself and others, that you attacked your family at dinner and are showing violent delusions." My blood ran cold, but I wasn't surprised. "Patricia," I said, and he confirmed it. "She's also called 3 different psychiatric facilities trying to get an emergency hold placed on you. Dorothy, she's escalating faster than we anticipated. I'm heading to the courthouse now to file an emergency restraining order, but you need to be prepared. She might show up again tonight with people she's convinced to help her." I thanked him and hung up, my mind racing through possibilities, each worse than the last. When I returned to the kitchen, I found Sandra on her phone, her face pale. "Dorothy," she said, looking up at me with wide eyes. "Patricia just posted on Facebook. She's telling everyone you've had a psychotic break, that you pulled a knife on her at dinner, that she's desperately trying to get you help before you hurt yourself or someone else." She turned her phone toward me, and there it was. A long, dramatic post full of lies, already gathering comments and shares from concerned friends who didn't know the truth. But what chilled me most were the photos she had included. Pictures of me from last month when I had the flu, looking frail and confused. Pictures she had apparently taken specifically for this purpose. The planning, the premeditation, the cold calculation of it all made my stomach turn. My own daughter had been building a case against me for months, documenting moments of vulnerability to use as weapons. "We need to respond to this," Helen said, already typing on her phone. "I'm posting the recording I made, letting everyone hear what really happened." Marcus and Keisha joined in, sharing their own accounts of the evening, defending me against their mother's lies. But I knew it wouldn't be enough. Patricia had gotten her story out first, had played the concerned daughter so convincingly that people would want to believe her. The doorbell rang, and we all froze. Through the window, I could see not Patricia, but a man in a suit holding a clipboard. Adult Protective Services, just as Mr. Grayson had warned. I stood up, straightening my spine, preparing for another battle. "Record everything," I told Marcus quietly. "Every word, every moment. This is what your mother wanted. Strangers coming to evaluate my mental state based on her lies." The man at the door was younger than I expected, maybe mid-30s, with kind eyes that held professional concern. "Mrs. Williams? I'm David Chen from Adult Protective Services. We received a concerning report about your well-being, and I need to do a welfare check." I invited him in, knowing that refusing would only make things worse. As he entered, he took in the scene, the group of family members, the half-eaten pies, the general calm that contradicted Patricia's reports of violence and chaos. "Mr. Chen," I said, my voice steady and clear, "I understand you have a job to do, but you should know that the report you received came from my daughter, who is attempting to have me declared incompetent so she can steal my assets. I have documentation of her fraud attempts, recordings of her planning this deception, and witnesses to what really happened tonight." He listened patiently as I showed him the evidence, his expression growing more troubled with each document, each recording. Marcus and Keisha confirmed my version of events, as did Helen, Jerome, and Sandra. Mr. Chen took notes, asked careful questions, and observed my responses. "Mrs. Williams," he said finally, "you appear to be completely coherent and capable. However, given the serious nature of the allegations, I need to recommend that you voluntarily speak with a psychiatrist within the next 48 hours to formally clear this matter. It's not required, but it would help protect you against future claims." I agreed immediately, knowing that having official documentation of my mental competence would be crucial in the legal battle ahead. As Mr. Chen prepared to leave, he paused at the door. "Off the record," he said quietly, "I see situations like this more often than you'd think. Family members trying to take advantage of elderly relatives. Document everything, get legal protection in place, and don't let them back in your life. People who do this don't usually stop until they're stopped by the law." After he left, we sat in stunned silence for a moment before Keisha's phone rang. Her face went white as she listened. Then she handed it to me. "It's Dad," she whispered. Tom's voice was different now. No longer the smooth businessman, but something rougher, more desperate. "Dorothy, you need to listen very carefully. Patricia is having a breakdown, a real one. She's talking about doing something drastic if you don't drop all of this and give us what we need. She's not stable right now." I could hear Patricia in the background, sobbing and screaming about betrayal and abandonment. "Tom," I said firmly, "if Patricia is having a mental health crisis, take her to the hospital. But don't you dare try to manipulate me with threats of what she might do. Whatever happens is a result of her own choices, not mine." He started to argue, but I hung up, my hands shaking now despite my firm voice. "Should we be worried?" Jerome asked, speaking for the first time in an hour. "Could she actually hurt herself?" It was Helen who answered, her voice bitter with recognition. "Patricia doesn't hurt herself," she said. "She hurts other people and calls it love. This is just another manipulation tactic. But even as she said it, I could see the worry in everyone's eyes. The Patricia we had seen tonight, the one whose mask had completely shattered, was capable of anything. I thought about all the photos on my walls, the smiling family portraits that now seemed like evidence of a lie I had been living for decades. How many of those smiles had been genuine? How many had been performed for the camera, hiding resentment and greed? At midnight, as we were debating whether anyone should stay with me for safety, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. Against my better judgment, I answered. The voice on the other end was unfamiliar, female, professional. "Mrs. Williams? This is Dr. Sarah Martinez from Riverside Manor." My blood ran cold. The facility Keisha had mentioned, the one with violations. "I'm calling because your daughter has put down a significant deposit to reserve a room for you, claiming you'll be arriving within the week. She seemed quite distressed, insisting it was urgent. I wanted to verify this with you directly, as our policy requires when possible." The audacity of it took my breath away. Even after being exposed, even after the police, even after everything, Patricia was still trying to execute her plan. "Dr. Martinez," I said carefully, "I am not now, nor will I ever be, a resident of your facility. My daughter is attempting to commit fraud and elder abuse. Please return her deposit and inform her that any further attempts to admit me against my will result in legal action against your facility." The doctor was professionally apologetic, clearly concerned about liability, and assured me they would handle it immediately. After I hung up, I looked around at the faces watching me, my grandchildren, my sister-in-law, my extended family, and I saw the same disbelief I felt. "She's still trying," Marcus said, his voice a mixture of awe and disgust. "Even now, even after everything's been exposed, she's still trying to lock you away." That's when I understood the full depth of Patricia's desperation. This wasn't just about money anymore. It had become about winning, about not being defeated, about maintaining the narrative she had built, where she was the concerned daughter and I was the declining parent. Her entire identity had become wrapped up in this lie, and having it exposed had broken something fundamental in her. The next morning came too quickly, bringing with it a circus I hadn't anticipated. News of the dramatic Thanksgiving dinner had spread through our community like wildfire. Patricia's Facebook post battling against the truth that Marcus, Keisha, and Helen were spreading. My phone rang constantly. Friends, distant relatives, neighbors, all wanting to know what had really happened. Some believed Patricia's version and called to scold me for being difficult. Others, who knew me better, offered support and shared their own suspicions about Patricia's behavior over the years. "I always wondered why she was so eager to be involved in your finances," my neighbor Mrs. Chen said when she stopped by with a casserole. "My daughter tried something similar with me, but I caught it early. You're brave for standing up to her, Dorothy. Braver than most." Mr. Grayson arrived at noon with more paperwork and bad news. "Patricia and Tom have hired an attorney," he said, settling into my kitchen with his briefcase. "They're claiming undue influence, saying you've been manipulated by other family members to turn against them. They're demanding access to your medical records, financial statements, everything." I laughed, actually laughed, at the absurdity of it. "Let them demand," I said. "My records will show a woman in full possession of her faculties, managing her own affairs, while theirs will show debt, deception, and fraud." He smiled slightly. "That's the spirit. But Dorothy, this is going to get ugly. They're desperate, and desperate people do desperate things. I've seen families torn apart by less. Are you prepared for that?" I looked at him, this man who had become my champion in a battle I never expected to fight. My family was torn apart the moment my daughter decided I was worth more as a bank account than as a mother. I'm not destroying anything. I'm just refusing to be buried alive. That afternoon, something unexpected happened. Tom's mother, Ellen, called me. Ellen and I had always been cordial but never close, and I expected her to defend her son. Instead, her voice was heavy with shame. "Dorothy, I'm calling to apologize and to warn you. Tom has done this before." My hand tightened on the phone as she continued. "His father's mother, my mother-in-law. Years ago, when she started showing real signs of dementia, Tom convinced us to let him handle her finances. We found out later he'd been skimming money for months before she died. We kept it quiet to avoid scandal. But Dorothy, I should have warned you when he married Patricia. I thought maybe he'd changed. Maybe it was a one-time mistake. I was wrong, and I'm sorry. The revelation shouldn't have surprised me, but it did. It painted Patricia not as the mastermind, but as someone who had married a man who enabled and encouraged her worst instincts. Two people who had found in each other a partner for their greed. By evening, I was exhausted, but couldn't rest. Marcus and Keisha had been staying with me, refusing to leave me alone, and their presence was both comforting and heartbreaking. They were choosing me over their parents, choosing truth over comfort, and I knew the cost of that choice would follow them for years. As we sat together watching the news, trying to pretend everything was normal, Keisha suddenly spoke. "Grandma, there's something else you should know. Last month, Mom had me sign some papers. She said they were for insurance, but now I'm wondering." My heart sank as she pulled up photos on her phone of the documents she had wisely photographed. They were transfer documents for my car, predated and waiting for an opportunity to be filed. "She was going to take everything," Keisha whispered. "Even your car. She was going to leave you with nothing." The next day brought the psychiatric evaluation Mr. Chen had recommended. Dr. Angela Foster was a woman in her 60s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. She put me through a comprehensive assessment, cognitive tests, memory evaluations, psychological screenings. I answered every question clearly, completed every task successfully, and at the end, she leaned back with a small smile. "Mrs. Williams, not only are you completely competent, you're remarkably sharp for any age. Your recall is excellent, your reasoning is sound. And frankly, your handling of this situation shows a level of strategic thinking that many younger people couldn't manage." She provided me with a detailed report that would serve as legal documentation of my mental fitness, a shield against any future attacks on my competency. "Can I ask you something off the record?" she said as she prepared to leave. "How did you stay so calm when you realized what they were doing? Most people would have fallen apart." I thought about her question, about the weeks of careful planning, the consultations with lawyers, the evidence gathering. "I had something they didn't expect," I said. "I had James's voice in my head, telling me to be smart, not emotional. My late husband always said that the best revenge against someone trying to tear you down is to stand up straighter. So that's what I did. I stood up straighter." Dr. Foster nodded with what looked like admiration. "Your husband sounds like he was a wise man." "He was," I said, touching my wedding ring. "And he would have been heartbroken to see what our daughter became. But he also would have protected what we built together, just like I'm doing now." 3 days after Thanksgiving, the other shoe dropped. I was in my garden, trying to find peace among my roses, when a process server arrived with papers. Patricia and Tom were suing me for intentional infliction of emotional distress, defamation, and elderly abuse. They were claiming I was abusing myself by refusing help. The irony of it was so thick I could barely breathe through it. But alongside the lawsuit was something else, a petition for conservatorship, filed on the grounds that my recent erratic behavior proved I needed supervision. They had found a doctor, not the one they had originally planned to use, but someone else, who had signed an affidavit saying that based on Patricia's descriptions, I appeared to be suffering from paranoid delusions. A doctor who had never met me, never examined me, but was willing to stake his professional reputation on Patricia's words. Mr. Grayson was at my house within an hour, his face grim but determined. "This is actually good news," he said, which seemed absurd until he explained. "They're getting sloppy, making mistakes. This doctor, Dr. Reynolds, has a history of questionable diagnoses. He's been investigated twice by the medical board. And filing elderly abuse charges against you while simultaneously trying to gain conservatorship?" He shook his head. "No judge will take that seriously. They're throwing everything at the wall to see what sticks, which means they know they're losing." But even knowing that, the stress was taking its toll. I found myself checking locks multiple times, jumping at unexpected sounds, wondering what Patricia might do next. If this story resonates with you, if you've ever had family members who saw you as an opportunity rather than a person, please subscribe to hear how this ends, because what happened next changed everything for all of us. The court hearing was set for 2 weeks after Thanksgiving. Those 2 weeks felt like 2 years, each day bringing new attempts by Patricia to paint me as incompetent. She called my doctor's office pretending to be me, trying to get information about my medications. She showed up at my bank, claiming to be my authorized representative, only to be turned away by a manager who knew me personally and had been warned about the situation. She even contacted my church, telling them I was suffering from religious delusions and shouldn't be allowed to attend services. Each attempt was more desperate than the last, and each one was carefully documented by Mr. Grayson for our case. The morning of the hearing, I dressed carefully in the navy suit James had bought me for our 40th anniversary, the one that made me look like the professional woman I had been before retirement. Marcus and Keisha flanked me as we entered the courthouse, their presence a statement that not all of my family had turned against me. The courtroom was smaller than I expected, more intimate, which somehow made it worse. Patricia and Tom sat at their table with their attorney, a young man who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. Patricia had dressed in soft pastels, trying to look like the concerned daughter, but her face was haggard, her eyes wild with something that looked like mania. Tom sat rigid beside her, his jaw clenched, his hands fisted on the table. Judge Catherine Bailey was a woman in her 70s, with silver hair and eyes that seemed to see everything. She reviewed the case files with methodical precision, occasionally looking up to study the parties involved. When she finally spoke, her voice was clear and commanding. "This is quite a situation," she said. "We have a petition for conservatorship based on alleged incompetence, a countersuit for attempted fraud and elder abuse, and enough accusations to fill a soap opera. Let's start with the basics. Mrs. Dorothy Williams, please approach the bench." I stood, my legs steady despite the churning in my stomach, and walked forward. The judge asked me a series of questions: my full name, my address, the date, current events, my understanding of why we were here. I answered each one clearly, my voice never wavering. "Now," the judge said, "I have here a psychiatric evaluation from Dr. Angela Foster stating that you are fully competent, and another from Dr. Reynolds, who has never met you, claiming you suffer from paranoid delusions. Mr. Peterson," she addressed Patricia's attorney, "would you care to explain how your client obtained a medical opinion from a doctor who has never examined the patient?" The young attorney shifted uncomfortably. "Dr. Reynolds based his assessment on detailed information provided by my client, who has been observing her mother's decline for months." The judge's expression hardened. "Observing or manufacturing? Because I also have here security footage, bank records, and multiple witness statements that suggest a very different story." What followed was 3 hours of testimony that laid bare the ugly truth of Patricia's scheme. Mr. Grayson presented the evidence methodically: the forged documents, the recorded conversations, the testimony from Helen about what she had overheard, the statement from Ellen about Tom's previous fraud. Each piece of evidence built on the last, creating an undeniable picture of deliberate deception and attempted theft. When Patricia took the stand, she cried, she pleaded, she accused me of being manipulated by others. But when Mr. Grayson cross-examined her, asking specific questions about the forged signatures and the meetings with estate lawyers, her story fell apart. She contradicted herself, claimed not to remember crucial details, and eventually resorted to crying that she was only trying to help. Tom's testimony was even worse. Faced with evidence of his previous fraud against his grandmother, he tried to deny it until Mr. Grayson produced the affidavit from Ellen. His composure cracked, and the smooth businessman facade crumbled to reveal an angry, desperate man who actually said, "That money should be ours anyway. We've earned it by putting up with her all these years." The courtroom gasped at his words, and I saw Patricia's attorney put his head in his hands. Even Patricia looked shocked at Tom's admission, realizing too late that he had just destroyed any remaining credibility they had. When it was my turn to testify, I told my truth simply and clearly. I spoke about the decades of love I had given my daughter, the support through every crisis, the open door that had never closed despite her growing coldness. I talked about discovering the documents, the feeling of betrayal that went deeper than the attempted theft, the realization that my daughter saw me not as a mother, but as an obstacle to her financial goals. "Your Honor," I said, looking directly at Judge Bailey, "I'm not asking for revenge. I'm asking for protection. Protection from the two people who should have protected me, who instead chose to prey on me. I'm 67 years old. I've worked hard my entire life, saved carefully, and managed my affairs responsibly. All I want is to live the rest of my years in peace, without fear that my own daughter is plotting to lock me away and steal everything my husband and I built together." Judge Bailey's ruling was swift and decisive. "I find no evidence whatsoever that Mrs. Dorothy Williams is incompetent. In fact, I find her to be remarkably capable and clear-thinking. The petition for conservatorship is denied and dismissed with prejudice, meaning it cannot be refiled. Furthermore, based on the evidence presented, I'm referring this case to the District Attorney for criminal prosecution of Patricia and Thomas Hendricks for attempted elder fraud, forgery, and conspiracy." She turned to Patricia and Tom with a look of barely concealed disgust. "You should be ashamed of yourselves. This woman gave you life," she said to Patricia, "and you tried to bury her alive. This court also grants the restraining order requested by Mrs. Williams. You are to have no contact with her, directly or indirectly, and you are to stay at least 500 feet away from her person and property at all times." Patricia let out a wail that echoed through the courtroom, a sound of fury and defeat combined. "She's my mother," she screamed. "You can't keep me from my mother." But Judge Bailey's response was ice cold. "You kept yourself from your mother the moment you decided she was worth more to you dead than alive. Court is adjourned." As the gavel fell, I felt something release in my chest, a tension I hadn't realized I'd been carrying for months, maybe years. It was over. Not the pain, not the loss of the daughter I thought I had, but the immediate danger, the constant fear, the questioning of my own sanity. Outside the courthouse, Patricia made one last attempt. Despite the restraining order that had just been issued, she broke free from Tom and ran toward me, her face twisted with rage. "You've ruined everything," she screamed. "We're going to lose our house. We're going to lose everything. How could you do this to your own daughter?" Marcus stepped between us, his tall frame blocking her path. "The same way you could do it to your own mother," he said quietly. "Except Grandma used the truth. You used lies." The police officers who had been stationed nearby quickly intervened, and I watched as they led Patricia away in handcuffs for violating the restraining order she'd had for less than 5 minutes. It was the last time I saw my daughter's face in person, twisted with hatred for the woman who had given her everything except the one thing she wanted, my complete submission to her greed. The aftermath was both easier and harder than I expected. The criminal case moved forward, with Patricia and Tom eventually pleading guilty to lesser charges to avoid jail time. They received probation, massive fines, and were ordered to pay restitution, though I knew I'd never see a penny of it given their financial situation. They lost their house to foreclosure within 3 months, and the last I heard from Marcus, they had divorced and moved to separate states, each blaming the other for their downfall. The family was divided. Some relatives understood and supported me, while others, poisoned by Patricia's lies or unable to accept the ugly truth, cut me off entirely. I lost a daughter, yes, but I also lost cousins, nieces, and friends who chose to believe I was a cruel mother rather than accept that Patricia was a criminal. But I also gained things I hadn't expected. Marcus and Keisha became regular fixtures in my life, visiting weekly, calling daily, filling some of the void Patricia had left. They struggled with the guilt of choosing me over their parents, but they also knew the truth of who their parents were, and that truth set them free from the manipulation they'd grown up with. Helen became a true friend, someone who understood the pain of family betrayal and the strength it took to survive it. Even Jerome and Sandra, shocked into awareness by what they'd witnessed, became allies in rebuilding a smaller but more honest family circle. A year later, on Thanksgiving, I hosted dinner again. The table was smaller, just Marcus, Keisha, Helen, and a few friends who had stood by me through everything. As we went around the table sharing gratitudes, the difference from that terrible night was profound. Each person thanked others genuinely, specifically, with real love and appreciation. When it came to me, I raised my glass of good champagne, not the cheap stuff Patricia had tried to serve me, and said, "I'm grateful for truth. Even when it hurts, even when it costs us everything we thought we had, truth is the foundation of real love, and I'm grateful for each of you who chose truth over comfortable lies." Marcus raised his glass in response. "To Grandma Dorothy," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "who taught us that being family isn't about blood, it's about choosing to love honestly, even when that love requires courage." We clinked glasses, and in that moment, I felt James's presence so strongly, It took my breath away, not as a ghost or a memory, but as a part of me that had survived everything, the part that knew how to stand straight even when the world tried to bend me. He would have been proud, I think, of how I handled it all, proud that I protected what we built together, proud that I refused to be erased, proud that I stood up when they tried to bury me alive. The house is quieter now, but it's a peaceful quiet, not the tense silence that used to precede Patricia's visits. The walls still hold photographs, but I've removed the ones that feel like lies, the smiling family portraits that hid the rot underneath. Instead, I've put up pictures of genuine moments, Marcus and Keisha laughing at last Christmas, Helen and I at a concert, new friends who came into my life after the truth set me free. My phone doesn't ring with Patricia's demanding calls, my door doesn't shake with Tom's aggressive knocking, and my mind doesn't question its own perceptions anymore. I know who I am, Dorothy Williams, widow of James, mother of a daughter who chose greed over love, grandmother to two brave souls who chose truth over comfort, and survivor of an attempted burial by the very person I gave life to. Sometimes late at night, I think about Patricia as a child, that laughing girl on the swing, begging to go higher. I wonder when I lost her, when the daughter I raised became the woman who would destroy me for money. But then I realized the truth. I didn't lose her. She lost herself, piece by piece, choice by choice, until there was nothing left but greed, wearing a familiar face. The Patricia I loved, the daughter I raised, maybe she never really existed except in my hopes and dreams. Or maybe she did exist once, but she chose to kill that version of herself in pursuit of something that was never hers to take. I'm 70 now, still living in my home, still managing my own affairs, still sharp enough to know that family isn't always who you're related to. Sometimes it's who shows up when the masks fall off and the truth stands naked and ugly in the room. The toast I made that Thanksgiving 3 years ago, the one they'll never forget. It wasn't just words. It was a declaration of independence from the tyranny of toxic family bonds, a refusal to be sacrificed on the altar of someone else's greed, and a promise to myself that I would never again be invisible in my own life. Patricia thought she could erase me, make me disappear into some facility while she lived my life. Instead, she erased herself from a future that could have been filled with genuine love, real connection, and the wealth that matters, the wealth of family bonds that aren't for sale. The money she tried to steal still sits in my accounts, carefully managed, waiting to be passed on to Marcus and Keisha when my time comes, not as a weapon or a tool of control, but as a gift from a grandmother who learned the hard way that love and money should never be confused. They know they'll inherit not just financial assets, but also a legacy of standing up to manipulation, choosing truth over comfort, and refusing to be buried by anyone's greed, especially when that someone shares your blood. The house James and I built together still stands strong, filled now with honest love and genuine gratitude. And every Thanksgiving, when we raise our glasses, we toast to the truth that set us free, even though it cost us the illusion of a family that never really existed. Some might say I lost my family that night, but I say I found it. I found the family that chose to stand with truth rather than profit from lies. I found the strength James always said I had, but that I never needed to use until faced with the ultimate betrayal. And I found peace. Not the false peace of pretending everything is fine, but the real peace that comes from speaking your truth, standing your ground, and refusing to be erased by anyone, especially those who claim to love you while planning your destruction. That Thanksgiving toast changed everything, not because of what I said, but because I finally had the courage to say it. And that courage, more than any money or property, is the true inheritance I leave behind. The knowledge that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to be buried alive, even when the one holding the shovel is your own daughter.